Hey everyone, my name is Alan Pennico. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern California Rental Housing Association. I'll be your moderator today for this BIA-hosted California Balcony and Deck Inspection Seminar. We have three speakers today. We're going to take about an hour of your day out today. Just some housekeeping things, if you will. At the bottom of the screen, you'll notice the Q&A box. We're going to be using the Q&A box for all questions, and we're going to hold all questions to the end of the presentation. So after all three presentations are done, we'll go through the questions. So what's important here is that when you post a question, please let us know which speaker you would like that directed towards so we can move through those a little bit more quickly. So again, use the Q&A box and not the comment field. Thank you so much. So our three speakers today are Matthew Boomhauer of the Southern Cross Property Consultants, Brian Hill from Expera Group, and Glenn Martin of Public Interwest Building Consultants. So we're going to kick this off with Matthew Boomhauer from Southern Cross. Matthew, why don't you introduce yourself and start off with your presentation?
Great, thank you. So everybody should be able to see the slide deck now. So my name is Matthew Boomhauer. I'm the president and founder of Southern Cross Property Consultants. I'm licensed in California as both an architect and an attorney. That just means I get bored easy. And I'm going to throw out the obligatory disclaimer and say I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. So while I will happily answer your questions, please don't feel like you've just retained me. Our firm has already been doing quite a few of these inspections. And so what we're going to be talking about in my portion of this today is kind of the overview of how we got here, what happened, what are the laws, and what's included. And then my co-panelists will talk specifically about how the inspections will happen and then what happens after you get your inspection and you have to start making changes or repairs. So how did we get here? So the picture that's kind of the image in the background is the aftermath of an incident that was truly tragic. And what we had was a situation where there was an apartment complex in Berkeley, California. It was called the Library Garden Apartments. And construction was completed in 2006. And on June 16th of 2015, a fifth floor balcony collapsed. Now, at the time that it collapsed, it had a number of college students on it. There were 13 people that were on the balcony. And when the balcony sheared off, and you can see that it completely came off the building, those 13 people fell 40 feet to the ground. 6 of them were killed and 7 of them were injured. 3 of them were paralyzed. And so out of this, there were a number of responses. The city of Berkeley immediately implemented emergency regulations for mandatory inspections of balconies and other elevated elements within apartment buildings. And the state of California looked at this. They actually adopted new code changes. So any building that's submitted for a building multifamily project, whether it's a condo or apartment, that's submitted for a building permit after January 1st of 2020 is actually subject to the current building code. And that includes a bunch of changes that were designed to fix some of the problems that were identified with this construction. But the state also sat there and said, look, we have a ton of existing housing stock that's currently out there that may have these problems, and we need to come up with a way to fix that. And so the state passed a series of laws. SB 326 and SB 721 both do different things. And I'm going to put these up side by side because I know some of the people here deal with homeowners associations and condominium properties, and other people deal with multifamily rental, so apartment kind of things. And these laws do different things for those two different types of housing types. So SB 326 was passed in 2019. And specifically, even though we popularly refer to these by the Senate bills that were the legislation that passed these under, these specifically got codified into state law. So SB 326 modified Civil Code Section 551A and the subsequent sections of that section of the Civil Code. When SB 721 was passed a year earlier in 2018, it actually added a section to the Civil Code 17973. So if you really want to go out and see specifically what the law says, those are the spots you can go and look for those. So what needs to be inspected under these laws? Well, it's actually very similar with both of them. So the first off is everybody refers to these as the balcony bills, but that's a real misnomer because while balconies are certainly part of this and they were the triggering event, it actually applies to what the code now refers to as exterior elevated elements, or EEEs. And the way that the law defines EEEs is by sitting there and saying these are anything that is a wood structure in whole or in part. And then in 721 and 326, this language is direct quote. It includes all elevated decks, balconies, landings, stairway systems, walkways, guardrails, handrails, or any parts of those that are exposed to weather and with a walking surface more than 6 feet above grade or above ground. And then SB 326, because it came a year later, actually added some clarifying language. It also added that it included the associated waterproofing elements, and it clarified that these things, these exterior elevated elements, had to be not just 6 feet above grade or ground, but also be designed for human occupancy or use. So if a building has a steel structure or it's a concrete building like a high rise, those aren't wood elements. You don't have to inspect those. This is really aimed at buildings where some portion of these exterior elevated elements are made out of wood. And so this is actually a graphic, and this is from the city of Berkeley, and it's one of the better graphics I've seen, so I've shamefully copied it, and I use it in all my presentations on this. And so what you can see on the right side of this image is all these things in dark red are things that the city of Berkeley says would need to be inspected. And this correlates perfectly because the Berkeley ordinance was actually the basis for the inspection requirements in both SB 326 and SB 721. And so you can see that the exterior stairs, the columns supporting the exterior stair tower that goes up, all of the landings, and then all of those exterior walkways that we have on so many of our Southern California buildings, all of that needs to be inspected. Now, again, if you have steel stringers on your stairs and concrete treads, doesn't have to be inspected. If those vertical columns are of steel, doesn't have to be inspected. But if these things are wood, then they do fall into this. And then on the left-hand side, you can see that there's 3 different balconies that they've highlighted in different configurations where they all cantilever out from the building, and the balcony and the guardrail would be captured under these laws. Now note up above on the 4th level, and you can actually see where my cursor is up here, because this balcony condition is fully supported by the unit below, similar to this condition here where they haven't highlighted this piece, technically those don't need to be inspected under these laws. They're really only looking at things where the exterior element itself is somehow supposed to be self-supporting. So who has to comply with these 2 laws? So SB 326, as we've said, applies to common interest developments. Those are commonly referred to as homeowners associations. There have to be 3 or more units. So if it's a homeowners association and it's a duplex, no, you're not in this. The minute you have 3 units or more, you get captured in this law. There are no provisions in here that change the requirements based on the size of the association, or when we get to 721, the size of the apartment complex. There is an exception under SB 326 for single family homes or PUDs, planned unit developments. So if you have a homeowners association that's all single family homes, this doesn't apply to you. And if you have PUDs, more of a townhome setup, but a situation where you actually own the dirt as well as the building above it, then this doesn't apply to you. And that's something that your attorney can look at your documents and tell you for sure how you've been structured and if you get captured in this or not. And then the more important thing is you have to actually have EEEs. I got a request from somebody the other day for a proposal, and when I started looking at the property pictures and pulling it up on Google Earth before I even drove out to the property, I realized they didn't have anything that made them fall into this. So with 721, same thing, multifamily residential, 3 or more units has to have EEEs. Who can perform the inspections? Slightly different between the 2 laws. For SB 326, it has to be either a licensed architect or a licensed structural engineer. And the reason for that is because SB 326 requires that licensed professional to actually affix their stamp to the report. SB 721 is a little broader. You can have a licensed architect. You could also have a licensed civil or structural engineer. You can have a licensed contractor. That contractor has to have either an A, general engineering, B, general contracting, or C5, which is a structural framing license. And they have to have 5 years of experience in constructing multi-story wood frame buildings. But if you use a contractor to do these inspections, that same contractor cannot perform any repairs that are required. Or you can have a certified building inspector do this work, so a private inspector. How many EEEs require inspection? Again, very different between these two laws. And I know Brian Hill is going to go into this in his presentation, but for SB 326, you have to have a random statistically significant sample. The law specifically states 95% confidence by the inspector in their recommendations with a plus or minus 5% margin of error. I'm not a math guy, so I actually paid a statistician to put together a formula for us to use for this. I know many people doing these inspections have done the same thing. But as a general rule of thumb, if it's less than 25 of these elements, you're going to end up inspecting everything, and then it kind of just goes down from there. With SB 721, it's different. It's 15% of each individual element. So the inspector is going to tell you how many different element types you have, and then how many of those need to be inspected. So for example, if you have exterior stairs, 15% of your exterior stairs need to be inspected. If you have different sized balconies, those are all different sized elements. And so it's going to matter how they're going to be set up and inspected.
Matthew, this is your 2 minutes.
Thank you. So then when do the inspections need to be completed? Well, both of these require the first inspection to be done by January 1st of 2025. For SB 326, you then go into a 9-year cycle, and this matches up with the reserve inspections that are already required under law. And it's important to note that these inspections become part of the association records as well as part of your reserve report, which means that they become a disclosable item for the association. With SB 721, there's inspection cycles every 6 years, and you have to maintain those records for 2 inspection cycles, so for 12 years. And then what happens if you don't comply? I get this question all the time. So in both cases, you take on a liability risk. If someone gets hurt, God forbid, on the property, and you haven't done these inspections, then you lose the protection of being able to say, well, gosh, we didn't know about this, because you should have. Both of these actually also can be enforced by the local jurisdiction through code enforcement complaints. And so all it's going to take is a disgruntled homeowner or a disgruntled tenant calling the local jurisdiction and saying, hey, they haven't done these inspections. And now you're going to be dealing with this municipal jurisdiction and any fines or penalties that they're going to imply. And then with SB 326, you've also got the challenge of being in violation of the Davis-Sterling Act, which is the portion of civil code related to how HOAs have to operate. And that opens up the homeowners association to a bunch of liability. So that's the broad overview. We're going to hand it off now to Brian, and he's going to talk about how the inspections will actually take place. So give me 1 second to stop sharing.
While you do that, Matthew, just a reminder, as a few more people have popped into our session, you've joined the BIA San Diego's Balcony and Deck Inspection Seminar, and we're taking all Q&A through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please put the speaker's name you'd like to address your question in your Q&A, and we'll be answering all Q&A at the end. So with that, we'll switch over, and Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Brian Hill, and I'm going to be taking you through the SB 721, SB 326 inspection process. We were trying to think of a good analogy to help people who maybe haven't done thousands of balcony inspections over the past 20 plus years. You know, what can you expect from this process? And somebody in our office suggested, you know, this is actually a lot like COVID when you think about it. With COVID, if you're in the multifamily residential housing space in California, these balcony inspections, it's part of the new normal. And as Matthew was saying, it's not just a one-time thing. This is a cyclical thing that we're going to be doing every 6 to 9 years. And so if you're responsible for a portfolio of properties, for example, this probably becomes a continuous process that you're engaged in. Also, like COVID, what you have to be really careful about is just because there's no symptoms of a potential failure doesn't mean that you don't have a real issue. Let me explain. When Xperi Group was asked to come out and investigate the actual balcony that did fail in Berkeley, after it had been removed to a secure location, the thing that probably disturbed us the most is that when you looked at the outside of the balcony that had been removed, it was built like a lot of other balconies in California. We like our wood framing concealed by stucco or wood siding sometimes. And so the outside of the balcony, which was covered in stucco, looked fairly pristine. There was nothing to suggest that it was on the verge of failure. And yet the inside, the wood framing, the load-bearing components, they were like pulled pork. Had the owners of the property conducted an inspection inside of that deck assembly, they might have seen the issues that were there and could have prevented the catastrophe that occurred, not to mention the criminal charges and a 9-figure payout. But unlike COVID, masks, hand washing, and social distancing aren't going to get us to compliance with SB 721 and SB 326. For that, we have to visually inspect those sometimes concealed wood-framed load-bearing components, and we want to do it through the least invasive, least intrusive means necessary, because we want to save on money. The first option is always going to be, regardless of whether it's SB 721 or 326, you have to conduct a thorough visual inspection. And you're looking at again, it's not just the decks or the balconies, it's also your exterior elevated walkways, it's landings that have wood framing and extend past the building exterior wall. We're going to look at that element, we're going to look at the various surfaces, but we're also looking at how it integrates with the adjacent building materials and building components. We're looking at the guardrails and how they're attached and configured and if they're safe and if the attachment points are proper. So we're looking at all that information. But again, if the wood framing that comprises the load-bearing components, if it's concealed by stucco, visual inspection alone is not enough. Now in SB 326, it mentions infrared thermography. And this is a very useful tool for diagnostics in building science. I'm not sure though if it's going to get you to compliance with SB 326 or 721 if you have concealed wood framing. The way thermography works, it doesn't actually let you see what's behind the stucco. It's giving you a different kind of representation, but it's not the same thing. So if we do have concealed structural framing behind the stucco, we have to look beyond the surface somehow. So one of the options that we like to recommend is a borescope. And in this scenario, what we're doing is we're drilling a series of holes in the underside of the elevated walkways or balconies or whatever. And we're drilling in between the load-bearing components and inserting this fiber optic camera, which allows us to then visually inspect the wood framing and the sheathing. Now, it's a great tool and it's a cost-effective means for conducting some of the inspection, but if we find staining or discoloration, what we don't know from the borescope alone is whether or not we're looking at a situation that is an active leak that needs to be addressed. Or are we looking at some historic condition that has long since been repaired and doesn't present concern? We're also not able to determine what the current structural integrity of those wood components are just by visually looking at them. So if we find problems, chances are we're probably going to have to go a little bit farther. And that's where destructive testing comes in. Destructive testing is really the only conclusive way to put your eyes on concealed framing components when they're concealed by the stucco or wood siding, cladding, or other materials. The problem though is that destructive testing is really costly. You're going to hate it. Your residents are really going to hate it. It's no fun and it's hard to see where the return on investment comes from. So the goal with destructive testing is we want to limit it as much as possible and be very strategic about it. One of the options that is our favorite option, we try to recommend this as much as possible, is the removable or operable soffit vent. And in this is kind of like a hybrid approach where you're actually cutting a slot in the underside of the stucco soffit and inserting this vent accessory. Now, these vents are really cool. There's a reason that California code requires them now, and that's because if you do have water that gets into this assembly, the vent allows that moisture to dissipate. instead of accumulating, which is what led to the deterioration that ultimately caused the catastrophe in Berkeley. So when in doubt, go with the vents. We really like those. Now let's get into sampling and statistics. This is a complicated subject, and I'm going to do my best to talk about it. Let's talk about what first is sampling. We decided to ask an expert. It wasn't this guy. We reached out to Dr. Robert Riffenberg, and Dr. Riffenberg is, besides being a member of SCRHA and apartment owner himself, he is a statistician, and he deals especially with the statistics of medicine. And we were having some conversations about some of the similarities and differences that you find in terms of the variation that exists within the human body, as well as the variation that exists in the built environment. And we're talking about the concept of categorizing your exterior elevated elements. It's really easy when you have a bunch of identically designed and constructed balconies. But when you have these uniquely designed and constructed exterior elevated elements, can you really extrapolate information that you find at one location to another? It's kind of a complicated subject, and there's a lot of variables that you have to consider when it comes to determining the populations that you're ultimately going to be sampling in your process. When it comes to statistical significance and the specific protocol called out in SB 326, this is a graphical representation. There's no way we have enough time to try and explain how do you reach those numbers. But I thought it would be more useful if we could look at, if we compared the same number of exterior elevated elements, and we looked at how SB 721 approaches it with apartments, and how SB 326 rather approaches it with the condos. And you can see that if you're only dealing with 4 identically constructed balconies, for example, in SB 721, great, you only have to inspect 1. If you have a condo, you're inspecting all 4. If we move up to 100 in our population, SB 721, we only got to cover 15. But if it's SB 326, we have to do 80%, 80 of those units. So there's a lot to take away here and a lot that we don't have time to cover. SB 721 and SB 326 are complicated. So really, as Matthew suggested, seek out legal counsel, seek out experts to help you guide you in your path to compliance. Removable soffit vents, please consider them. They're very good investment. Early detection and intervention are really the keys, though, to managing the risks of exterior elevated elements. Whether it's finding conditions before they become catastrophic or finding conditions before they present further damage that requires problems. The sooner you get in there, the better. So what does the path to compliance look like? Step 1, you need to figure out what's required for your specific property or properties. You need to evaluate your own tolerance for risk, and based on that, design the inspection protocol that's going to help you achieve the goal, but balancing that with the need to maintain cash flow or your reserves or whatever. And ultimately, plan the inspections out in terms of the time frame. Waiting until 2024 is a really bad idea. I'll just let you know now. The prices are going up in 2024. Everybody's going to be scrambling to get their inspections done by January 1st, 2025. So if you have repairs that you need to make as well, you want to leave yourself plenty of time to plan for that. And with that, I think it's probably a good time to switch it over to Glenn to talk about the repairs.
Glenn, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself. Your microphone is still on mute, remember.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Very good. Okay, so Glenn Martin with Pacific Interwest Building Consultants, and we have a history of doing construction inspections for both the apartment and condo industry and single family. Been doing it a long time. We have ICC licensed inspectors. We are general building contractors, general engineering contractors. We have an on-site or an on-staff architect as well. and we write and publish books on construction standards and maintenance. So, you know, at the core of our business has always been risk management, waterproof design, plan reviews, construction inspections, water testing and HERS testing or rating. And for us, moving into this sort of new industry of 326 and 721 is a bit natural. We've been inspecting these decks for a long time, and it's great for us to get back and look at these and get a lot more data for this 721 and 326 program. And we found a lot, and I'm sure that both Matthew and Brian have found the same thing that we have, and that is that it's surprising, much like the Berkeley deck collapse that started this, as Brian was talking about. We're surprised that so many communities that we look at that appear to be in really good shape are not. And it doesn't seem to follow a pattern other than, you know, I think the closer to the Pacific Ocean that you are, the more likely you are to see some issues. The older the community and certain types of construction are certainly more prone to have these issues. And again, as Brian was talking about, the ventilation is really one of the key things that we find as a major contributor to these issues. So as we have gone through and looked at how the system works, so I think that the inspection part is a very important part of the overall process of 721 and 326, of course, but it's probably the smallest on the financial side. And I think it's important that the firms that do this work are qualified to do it. And you can certainly be qualified to do the inspection itself, but the deliverable on the backside is what really makes the difference on the overall cost, we think. So with that, you know, I'd like to just kind of step into what happens next, and that kind of will help backstop and explain why it's important to have a company that does this for a living that's very good at it. And as Matthew pointed out, there is a difference between 326 and 721 on the requirements for the inspection. And I think it's important to understand the kinds of people you want to hire for that inspection. It's just as important as the people that you would hire to do the design work for the repair or the repairs themselves, obviously. So you have, once the inspection has been completed, it sort of things fall into two categories. There's the immediate hazard situation where we find that there's a condition so serious that shoring should be put in place and areas should be cordoned off to disallow access and so forth. And then normal repairs, right? That you'll find things that need to be addressed. They're not an immediate hazard. So if there's not an immediate hazard, you have 120 days to apply for a permit. So that gives you time to do design and prepare your plan for these repairs. And then once you get a permit, you have another 120 days to get the work finished and get it approved. So the key is in the middle of these two. The law is, the bills were smart enough to realize you can't include there that period of time in the requirement for the municipality, for the jurisdiction to provide that permit. The permits can vary in time from a couple of weeks to, we have some now that have taken 6 months and we still haven't seen the permit come in. Certainly some of that is part of COVID, as the municipalities have become less efficient by working remotely. And many of them are deeply impacted by the boom in construction right now, that seems to be related to COVID as well. Under, urban flight and other issues, these municipalities have been buried with permit applications. So there is a period of time there that you need to plan for that it will take. It's a bit frustrating for us because one of the things that we do as part of the inspection for a lot of our clients is we'll do the design of the repair, and I'm sure those on the call with me today, presenters, do the same thing. So we'll submit that, and it takes so long to get this ready. And during that period of time, obviously we can help the client put together the scopes of work and get bidding done and get the bids in and get prepared. But it's a challenge to get started. And so I'd like that the first warning is be prepared for a very lengthy time for receiving that permit and being able to go. There are, at the end of 180 days, we have to sign off that you've done that work or notify the jurisdiction if you haven't. Most of the jurisdictions, and I think Brian and Matthew will probably tell you the same thing, most of the jurisdictions have not fully engaged in this process. And many of them don't understand it. We're constantly reaching out in every jurisdiction that we work in and trying to bring them up to speed on what has to happen and what their role is. And many of them seem a bit too busy, frankly, to understand this. And we've been trying to educate them to the point where we can let them know that when this inspection is done and they're shoring in place, that's a very big problem for the owners of the apartments or the condos, and it's an unsafe condition that needs to be taken care of. But all too often it falls on deaf ears, and we're not able to get emergency relief on permits and so forth. So again, we try to get out there in advance to try to get the building departments to pay attention that these things are going on and trying to get them to respond as quickly as they can. Let me move the slide here. So some of the things that we find do require structural engineers, obviously. The beams and posts may have rotted out pretty badly. So you have to put together a plan that includes the structural, because so many of these structural elements are failing, whether it's joists or beams or posts. And you have to put together a plan. Generally, those elements are not dissimilar from those things you would do for any other permit application you would have. It's a site plan. You need to lay out the building type and element, the elevations. We do enlarged plans. Typically, you should do enlarged plans and details, and the structural engineer would be responsible for structural notes and details. You want to give as much information on there as possible for a couple of reasons. One, I think when you get into the plan check process, you don't want to go through several iterations of plan check. It'll only drag this out. Do a little bit better job, whether you hire an architect or you have your captured contractor do a turnkey where he brings his own plans in. Make sure that those plans are detailed fairly well so that you can get through the process. And the other side of it is the more detail you put in, the more specification that you add, the better bids you will get. I think it's important to understand that you're in a competitive environment right now, trying to attract good contractors and trying to get the best pricing. Most of you in the industry may know that, 6 months ago, lumber was running at about $345 or $350 per 1,000 board feet. It's up to over $1,000 a board foot now, 3 times as much in about a 6-month, 7-month period. So it's important to tighten up these bids the best you can, and the best way to do that is to be very clear about what you want repaired and how you want it repaired. So the better the drawings you have, the better the narrative on the scope, the more successful you'll be in getting the kind of pricing that you want.
Glenn, this is your 2-minute notice.
Very good, thank you. So as you know, I've kind of taken through the bid package that would include these things, and you want to make sure that the repair contractors are qualified to do this work, and hopefully there's someone that you have. It's a firm that you have some experience with. I think that's very helpful in making sure that you can control change orders as you open up buildings. Like any other remodel job, things are found, and you have to have a very good relationship with your contractor and a very clear understanding of how you'll handle those things. Obviously, when you're putting in manufactured products and you've got coating systems and so forth, you want to make sure you're following those manufacturer specifications. Very important. We've kind of talked about the key things here. I think managing the process is important. You need to be actively engaged or have someone that's paying very close attention to what's going on, again, to minimize change orders, but also to ensure that the work is done properly. You should try to get that work inspected by a third party as you would in new construction to ensure that things are done properly. We've talked about already every 6 years under 721, and 326 is a 9-year cycle. You need to keep these reports on file for a couple of cycles. So for quite a while, you need to make sure that's clear to your inspectors and to your team as they collect that data. The more data you collect, the easier it'll be on the next round of inspections. And again, you've heard this before, inspect now. Prices will be going up because why? Contractors are going to get busier and busier. Competition, even on the inspection side. The schedules are getting a little bit tougher right now to get the inspectors out. And it's certainly going to be much tougher with time. So, do your homework, prepare. Before you go into this, try to spend time with your inspection company to look at that portfolio and understand what you might have to do for budget purposes on your portfolio, so you can time those inspections by community so they fit in your cash flow. And I'd like to end with, certainly, by all means, vent. I think as the other presenters have mentioned, venting is the most important thing you can do. So when you do the inspection, we strongly recommend you leave a removable vent in. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Glenn. What a great presentation. Number one thing I heard was trust your experts. Let the expert be the expert. I don't know anybody who can just randomly afford a 9-figure settlement. So lean on your experts. That's why they're called experts. Great presentation. I learned a lot myself. One of the things I noted that our industries are going to have to be careful of, either it's HOA or multifamily available rentals, is transfer of ownership. With a 9-year inspection cycle, that could get lost very easily in that process, and nobody wants to be surprised at the last minute. So we had a total of 14 questions so far. We've answered about 6 of them in the chat room. The first question we're getting is, are the slides going to be available in the presentation? And my understanding is yes, the BIA is going to make them available either via email or on their website for everyone. So that should take care of that. The EEE, what does EEE stand for? And of course, that's exterior elevated elements. That's a term that I learned today. And then, Brian, can you show the slide where you did the comparison of SB 721 to SB 326 again, please?
Yes. Any questions?
Some people just wanted to be able to view this comparison again. And one of the questions that comes up is, actually a couple do, so I'm going to just try and tackle them all while we're here. When is SB 326 applicable versus S721?
Well, I'll take that one. The SB 326 is going to apply for condos. So any kind of common interest development. SB 721 applies when it's apartments. So there's a single owner with multiple units.
I'm just going to post that real quickly in the chat room as well. It's a simple explanation.
Let me add one point that comes up. If you're building new and you're doing condos, you are going to get questioned by the DRE. You're not going to be able to complete your condo map. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have a proposal on hand that shows the SB 326 inspection, and you're going to have to fund your reserves for that association with the cost for the inspection, just to give you that heads up.
Okay. Along the same lines, do current repairs needed today fall under SB 721?
So again, I'll take this one because it's sort of more on the legal end of things. Yes. So what we've been telling people, if they're planning on doing repair work on, whether it's a condo complex or an apartment complex, if they're doing repair work now, we've been strongly encouraging them to do the inspection at least in conjunction with that repair work, so they can make sure that any repairs they're doing can be signed off and applied towards the ultimate inspection. We've had a couple of people that like when this was first being passed, they had repair projects going on. They didn't take our advice. Now they're coming back to us and saying, we want to do inspections. And it's like, okay, but we have to do full on inspections of this entire thing, even though we know you just did repair work, because that's the way the law is written. So if you are doing repairs now, I strongly suggest that you work, if the people that did the documents for you are qualified to do the inspections and are doing them, because not every architect and engineer or even inspector is willing to take on the liability of doing these inspections. But if they are, then go ahead and incorporate that in.
Excellent. Along the same lines, do groups of 3 or more attached townhomes in an HOA need to comply?
Yes.
Okay. This one's from Matthew again. For HOAs, is there any provision that the HOA can delegate the requirement for an inspection to the individual homeowner rather than the HOA as a whole? There's
not, and I actually was in a presentation by a law firm that works with HOAs, and this question got asked to them. So this isn't totally original thought on my part, but the point that law firm was making was that's really risky for an HOA to try to shift the responsibility that way, because the HOA board so the HOA as a corporation is ultimately responsible for making sure that this work, the inspections take place. If you try to delegate it out to your homeowners, if you have any experience with HOAs at all, you know that trying to get all your homeowners to row in the same direction and do the same thing is kind of like trying to keep kittens in a box. And so you run the risk of some people complying, other people not, and then all of a sudden you're at the end of the timeline and you don't have a valid inspection that you can use on file. So it really isn't something that you can delegate out to your homeowners.
Excellent. Matthew, this is another question for you. What was the code section that defines what an EE is? If we have balconies that, for the most part, are set inboard from the primary exterior bearing wall and only 1 to 2 inches of the deck are cantilevered over a drop beam, would the deck be required to be inspected? What about buildings like low rise where the stairs are inbound from the building but have openings on each level to the exterior? Are the inshore landings and posts required to be inspected?
So the code sections, again, for SB 326, it starts at Civil Code Section 551A and it goes on from there. For SB 721, it starts in Code Section 17973. And what I can do, Becky from my team is on this call, I can just have her we've got a document that lays all this stuff out. I can have her send that over to Danielle to push out to the attendees, so you've got that to reference. With regard to the minimally cantilevered situation, I'd have to see it to 100% be sure, but it sounds like that probably would not get captured under SB 326. But again, I'd want to look at it to know for sure. But with the question of the inboard stairs, Yes, if they're exposed to the exterior of the building, even if it's one of those kind of carve-ins where there's roof over it and the stairs are inside like this, if it's exposed to the elements, if there's any way at all that moisture can get there, the way these laws are written, that captures these things. So you really need to, again, rely on your experts. If you've got a question on a property, it's much better to talk to someone like myself or Brian or Glenn and really have somebody give you an opinion so that when you make a decision, you've got something you can hang your hat on and it's not just you saying, well, I just don't think this applies to me.
I think, I hope the audience gets the sense from their answers, our speakers' answers today, that their capabilities, their skill sets, I mean, they clearly know what they're doing with regard to this. Glenn, this one's for you. Does reconstruction fall under the codes used at the time of the initial build or at current codes used to make the required repairs?
Current code. If you're going to make, especially now with balcony railing changes, so there are different rules for the construction of a balcony railing and the like, and you'd want to make those repairs to the current code for the permit that you're pulling.
Excellent. Another one for you, Glenn. Your last slide mentioned DRE document review and budget assistance. What does this mean?
Well, I think Matthew has touched on a little of that in that for those people who are setting up an HOA currently, you'll want to look at this, and Brian actually mentioned it in one of his responses here just a minute ago, that you'll need to prepare for the budgeting of this, and you do need to get a proposal from an inspector and use that, or another proposal that lays out the dollar amount for the budget itself in your HOA budget and documents. And then, if you are an ongoing HOA, builder's long gone and it's a managed HOA, it's good to engage a firm that does these inspections to kind of talk through that process and lay out a budget, because obviously this particular law was not anticipated at the time the HOA was put together, and the budgets don't reflect that. So obviously there needs to be a special assessment, a change in dues. There's a number of things that are extremely unpopular with homeowners that have to happen in order to facilitate both the inspection and the work itself, because the inspection, as I said, will more times than not lead to the need for some repairs. So I think meeting with your inspection company and laying out the potential cost of the inspections, and even going further, we try to provide some information based on the history of what we've seen to date, that a certain number of inspections or repairs may be necessary as a consequence of the inspection, and give some pricing. Not that we're giving a fixed price. It's not what we do. We're not the repair people, but to give them a range so that they can start to plan for this. They need to start messaging this to the homeowners on what the inspection and the repairs might be.
Excellent. Brian and Matthew, we have another question for you folks. How does SB 721 apply for inspecting something like a steel balcony that is bolted onto the solid beam at the rim of a wood structure, since there is no vent in this situation? This is like extreme jeopardy.
I'm going to defer to Matthew on that. I'm not an attorney.
All right. So that's a really interesting situation. And we were actually dealing with something similar to this, where somebody sent us images of a system where it was a steel frame and then it had wood infill on it, and it was bolted back to the structure, and the wood, the structure on the building, the rim joist was also wood. And our ruling on this was, yes, this would actually be captured by 721 and 326, because under the definition in the law of an exterior elevated element, it has to have a wood structure in whole or in part, or that wood structure needs to be the primary structural assembly. And so what we argued was, even though there's a metal rim joist around the actual balcony itself, the joists were wood, that's part of the structural system, and the rim joist at the kind of the skirt beam that this thing was tied back into was also a wood system. And so that's how this would get captured under this. The thing you have to understand, and I get that everybody's freaking out about this, and it's going to be incredibly inconvenient and incredibly expensive to get into this. And so I've heard some very, very, very creative, well, what about this? What if we did this? Maybe we could argue it this way. And what I will tell you is, the way these two laws have been written, it is so broad and it is so intentionally vague that it will be super easy for an even moderately competent attorney to be able to argue convincingly in a court that you should have fallen under this and you should have done it the way that we've presented it today, that you really have very few options but to just assume, like Brian was saying, it's kind of like COVID testing. It's annoying, and it's going to be relatively invasive and uncomfortable, but you just have to do it.
Yeah, these are the areas where, as a former recovering lobbyist, I'll tell you, be conservative on your viewpoints on this. Don't stretch the truth. Don't stretch reality. 9 figures, remember, 9-figure settlements. Be conservative on these things. That we're chuckling in my head because, as Matthew said that, Brian and I and Glenn are all shaking our heads in unison saying, yeah, don't do that. If inspection is completed prior to 2025, does the 6-9 years start from 2025 or the date completed? That's a good clarifying question.
Since nobody else is jumping in, I'll take this one. So it starts from the date that you get your final report, because the idea on this is you've got a roll-in period, but that the idea is that anytime during that ramp-up period or roll-in period, you can have the inspection done and then start the clock. The advantage to that, just so you know, all three of us have emphasized start doing these early because everybody's getting busy and the cost is just going to go up. The reality is, if you wait until the last minute and then you're on that same 6-year or 9-year cycle with everybody else that waited to the last minute, you're always going to be overpaying for these inspections, because you're going to have this huge block of other people that did the same thing, waited till the last minute and got into this. So even though it does start the clock and start this process rolling, you're always going to be out ahead of the curve, which should help you be somewhat cost advantaged.
Yeah. General question for HOA: how do you recommend we cover the cost if not all floor plans have a deck? Where we were told it cannot be paid from the reserve account.
Again, that seems like you're asking a lawyer question. So I'm going to qualify this with, I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer, and you should consult your legal counsel on this. You are allowed, SB 326 specifically allows the inspections and the repairs to be counted as a reserve expense. So I'm not 100% sure what the circumstances that would have caused legal counsel to tell you it can't be a reserve expense. But when this is the problem with common interest developments. When some homeowners have amenities in their unit that not every homeowner has, that's the reason why a lot of HOAs have different fee levels for their assessments based on the floor plan type or the unit type. If you're in an older HOA that doesn't have that and everybody's paying a flat rate, you just have to fall back on that's the reason they call this a common interest development, is because we're all in this together. And so even though only X percentage of our units have these elements, that means everybody has to pay into this. So again, it's not a great situation, but that's kind of the situation you're in.
Yeah, every HOA and CID has its own structure that's laid out in its bylaws and such, and this is why it's very unique to every individual. Very rare are they more than one that's, or more than two that are alike. They all vary. So this is why you have to seek the expert opinion for sure. As for venting, is it correct to assume that retrofit inspection vents are available for units that weren't built with such vents? Are they continuously similar to the soffit vents, or is one required for each joist bay?
So I'll take that. There are different venting options. A number of manufacturers have come out with various products. And this is one of those where it totally depends on your specific configuration. And how that element is constructed. Another big concern, and we haven't even talked about this, is what happens when you have a fire-rated assembly. We have a lot of wildfires. We're still dealing with about 5,000 homes that need to be reconstructed right now. And so to put in soffit vents, they need to be able to also prevent embers and ashes from nearby wildfires from coming in. So there's a host of concerns that come up, but yes, there are retrofit vents. They're very good, but you have to get the right one for your application, and there's a range of costs.
Excellent. I'm going to go kind of quickly here because we're coming up on the time. We still have 9 questions at the moment. Are inspections only for wooden cantilever and protruding structure, or are inspections required on balconies that are inset in the building?
Lawyer answer, it depends. Generally speaking, there needs to be a cantilevered element, but I've actually seen some scenarios where there's either a partial cantilever or somehow the balcony's inset, and we still felt like, in the interest of caution, or the attorney for the property owner or the HOA felt like they still needed to get captured for some reason. So it really needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis.
Excellent. Comment, great presentation. For each cycle, are the same 15% of the triple E's inspected, or does it have to be a different triple E?
It's different each cycle. Specifically with SB 721, the inspector needs to identify the elements that need to be inspected, and then when they do the report, they need to document where those elements were on the property, and then in the subsequent inspection cycles, a different 15% of elements need to be looked at. Now, before you lock in on that 15%, remember also that it's at the inspector's discretion to recommend additional inspections. So if I'm your inspector and I get in there on the first 15%, and let's say 80% of those have a significant issue that we start to identify, we may very well, as the inspector, actually recommend, and this will be a recommendation that comes with a lot of liability if you don't take it, to actually look at more elements. So that's something else to keep in mind with this, is that 15% is not just this magic stop here, you don't have to go any further.
Excellent.
I'd like to jump on that for a second, if I may.
Please, yeah.
While yes, it's the 15% that was not inspected earlier, one of the things we're looking at is, and it's something that we haven't talked about here today, and that is part of our job as inspectors is to report on what we think the life expectancy of that element is, or the components of that element. And we feel as a company that we need to go back and look at those estimates that we made. So 6 or 9 years hence, we'd like to go back and randomly select some of those same elements that we've already inspected to see how our estimate came out. This is a new industry, and outside of forensics that we've done in lawsuits, there really hasn't been an organized way of tracking this data. So we feel it's important to go back on a lot of those elements as we go back in the cycle and see how we did in our estimate.
There we go. This is to the 3 of you, I think. What are some of the cleanup language topics being deliberated right now at the state level?
This is Glenn, and I will say I don't know exactly what's being deliberated at the state level, but I think we've really looked at this, and we've talked to some of the municipalities, And, you know, one of the problems is that we have, if you're the jurisdiction, you have to train your staff to understand the difference between 721 and 326. And remember that maybe we haven't touched on this, but actually the local jurisdiction can use these laws as the minimum and are free to change that. And so I think what will happen is you'll see some of the jurisdictions, when they understand this process, will start to true them up. So they'll use one standard. And I think it's most likely that they would start to gravitate toward the more restrictive of the two and the one that requires the highest sampling, which is obviously 326. So I think you'll see jurisdictional by jurisdiction start to move to align these laws. And as they do that, the state is most likely to go and align them, because there really shouldn't be a difference in the way you judge an element only by its ownership, right? It's still the same framing, it's still the same elements, it's still the same problem. And the fact that the laws separate the requirements by form of ownership doesn't really track. So I would think that may get changed. They may get trued up.
Excellent. We are just past 1 o'clock. So if you had a 1 hour block for this, it is the 1 o'clock hour. The speakers have agreed to stay on a little bit longer. We'll probably push to about 10 after 1 or maybe 15 after 1 to try and answer the remaining 6 questions. So just want to give you all that notice. What is the normal cost for an inspection? And I think Matthew sort of pointed this out, that especially during COVID right now and things like this, the closer you get to the deadlines, the costs are going to continue to go up. It's going to be specific to the type of property you have in your particular situation. But I can pretty much promise the longer you wait, the more expensive it will be. And I think if you explore your options now, you might actually find some much better deals than you will in a year or 2 years from now. So I think that sort of answers that for everybody. Do the 2 Senate bills apply to all stucco clad beams that support habitable rooms that are covered by roofs and fully enclosed?
No, I think, if I understand the question correctly, if you have a stucco clad beam and then you've got habitable space above it, so like you've got a soft story condition like a garage underneath or something like that, well, it's a really, really good idea for you as a property owner or an HOA to be inspecting that beam and keeping up with it. That would not fall under the purview of this regulation.
Okay. It is recommended to install the removable vents for ease of inspection. Is that mainly for the 15% to be inspected? Also, in 6 years, can the same 15% of the units be inspected, or does it require them to be different? I think the second part of that question has already been answered, that it's going to be 15% different units in the future, but the first part of it about the soffit vents.
Yeah, so let me take that. So we definitely recommend installing the soffit vents for the ease of inspection. Also, we recommend installing them because it's a great belt and suspenders approach. If you do have water that's getting into those assemblies, 85% of which you have no idea their condition when you conduct that first inspection. Yeah, we recommend installing the vents. It's a great approach. It's going to prevent the actual distress. But here's another part. If you're in the for market, if you're in for rent housing, at least now you do have some sort of return on investment. You have a physical artifact that you can show your tenants that you care about their safety and well-being. So I guess that's the only other benefit of it, is that you do have a visible display of the money that you're investing.
Would it be worth it to just replace all the wood with some other material like steel?
Hey, with money, all things are possible, sure. I mean, the problem is that it's such a radically different construction type that, yes, you could absolutely do that. But I think what you're going to find is it's going to be very cost prohibitive. The reason wood construction was used is because it's one of the more cost effective methods of construction. So, I mean, yes, if you would like to upgrade your building, I will be happy to talk to you about that. But I think you'll be shocked at the price.
Mm-hmm.
And just to add on to that, you know, if it's for rent, you're going to deal with the ability to recapture some of those costs. So unless you're dealing with a substantial rehab where you're trading out entire systems in that building, you're probably not going to get that return on that investment.
Excellent. Matthew, this one's for you. Legally, if you have an old apartment building with balconies that look distressed, is it legally safe to sample at 15% the first time?
Yes, it's legal, but our recommendation, again, if we get into a situation and we start to look at the first 15% and we're failing, or we're saying that there are significant repair issues. I mean, if it's a life safety issue, that's one thing, and I doubt you would have let your building deteriorate to that point. But let's just say that it's a situation where we get in and we start to see pretty significant repair issues in the majority of the decks that are being inspected. Our recommendation as an inspector, and frankly, most of the attorneys I've talked to have said their recommendation as legal counsel would be to expand the scope of the inspection. So 15% is the minimum. You can always exceed that. So if you have an older complex and you feel like there are issues, and again, some of this is going to go back to your liability as well. If you know or should have known about a condition and you didn't address it, your liability doesn't change regardless of whether you had the inspection done or not. So if you're having an inspector on site, if you know you have issues, it probably makes sense to increase the sample size. But again, talk to the inspectors, look at what their approach is going to be. I mean, I know there's an inspector out there right now that's telling people it has to be 100% inspection and it has to be 100% destructive testing. If that's who you want to use, that's great, but that's one inspector's opinion. You probably ought to talk to multiple people so you can figure out, not shop for the answer you want to hear, but at least figure out who's going to help you do something that's going to make the most sense, because you're running a business. Whether you're an HOA or a for rent apartment complex, you still have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you're getting a good ROI on what you're doing.
No, absolutely, Matthew. And the thing in our association that we talk about is we're housing providers, all of us in some form or fashion. We provide housing for our family, for our friends, for our neighbors, for our community. And when you look at it from that perspective, that's who you're protecting when you do this and you follow the rules and make sure everything's being done right. So just keep that in mind. Last question, does a third-party vendor have to install the vents, or can this be done by the owner on site maintenance?
Go, Glenn. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say there would be no prohibition to doing it yourself, and it's not a bad idea if you can get in and do that work. I would check with a local jurisdiction to make sure you don't need a building permit to make that change, but because we always do that as part of our inspection. If we're going to put in ventilation, we'll check with the jurisdiction just to ensure that we don't need to pull a permit for that kind of a change. But you should be able to do that. If the person is qualified, I would think it wouldn't be a problem to do that. It's a fairly minor modification.
The only thing I did want to add is that there is a requirement under SB 721 that the inspector cannot be the same entity that's the contractor that's making repairs. So that would be the only restriction in terms of making repairs.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our questions. I just want to thank the three of you, Matthew, Glenn, and Brian, for participating in this BIA San Diego sponsored discussion on California balcony and deck inspections. It's been a great, very informative conversation. We answered 30 different questions throughout this session, and I'll watch for the materials to be posted to the website for more details on the slideshows and things. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon. It's been a pleasure.